The recent scuffle at Yangtze near Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh has become a flashpoint in the relationship between India and China. Added to it, the drill conducted by the Indian Air Force today, the military exercise involving the top-line aircrafts, Chinooks, Sukhoi, and Rafale, they are all raising an important question, a larger question rather. Is India and is China preparing for a war? A full-scale armed warfare in comparison to the border skirmishes that have taken place in the last several months? Or is it that both the sides are just engaging in a psychological warfare? To discuss this, we have invited General S. Sanjay Kulkarni, retired Director General Infantry, who is a very well-known face on Indian television discussing the defense issues. Welcome, Mr. General Kulkarni.
Thank you, Mr. Monty. Thank you very much.
General Kulkarni, this scuffle at Yangtze near Taiwan, do you consider this as a new normal? It's something which has been happening again and again and again. And if the data is showing that in 2015 itself, we had 400 border skirmishes between India and China, and which has gone up by 2019 to 600 times. So keeping this kind of data, statistics in view, is it just normal skirmish that's happening between India and China, or do you find something different this time?
Thank you very much, Mr. Monty. I think at the very outset, I must tell you what you've just asked is something which is in the minds of most people, and primarily because a statement emanated from a leader to say that China is preparing for war, and that probably all these things that are happening are, connected with the war. I would put it a little differently. It isn't so. First and foremost, I think neither country would like to go to war. That's first and foremost, because this is the place where you're referring to, Yangtze, is one of the 8 disputed points. And one of those 8 disputed points is one of it is Yangtze. Besides, of course, the Sundarong Chu, you have Namka Chu, you have Fishtail 1 and 2, and things of those kind. But having said that, this is not something, what you just used the word, is it the new normal? To some extent, I think we will have to now accept this as a new normal. Nothing like, I can tell you from my personal experience, that in 1999, similar thing had happened. I was only a colonel then. And then again, in 2006, when I went there as a brigadier, I found the same thing happening again on Yangtze. Same thing of pushing, same thing of trying to tell them that you have entered into our territory, please go back, and this would be happening. But what has happened now is something which hasn't been happening in the past, because first, you don't have such a great strength coming for patrolling. That's very important, because a strength, some say 300, some have even said 600. So that means a general strength, even presuming that it is 300, it is not less than a battalion worth of troops from China or PLA having come onto the post, and that too at an odd hour, 3 o'clock in the morning. So that is something, this is definitely can't be said as a new normal, because this seems to be a well thought out plan with a view to pressurize India as much as they can. Otherwise, at the time of 3 o'clock and such a large strength is something definitely, probably they felt that that they would succeed in intruding. Having intruded, they would hold the area, and whatever little area that they hold, then they will get on to negotiation, something you can say akin to what had happened in Galwan. First intrude, occupy, and then we'll go back to come back and then negotiate. And in that bargain, if should something go wrong, we'll see how by negotiations will hold it. So China has been pressurizing as much as it could along the 3,488 kilometers of the LAC that we have. And all this has a little bit of a backdrop. It hasn't just suddenly started happening. And that backdrop is something which all of us, especially your viewers, because they are in such great large numbers that listen to you, I think it's very important for all of us to understand as to what is this and why is it happening and can it be avoided? That is the most important thing. And if it is happening, why does it happen? First and foremost, I would I take 2 minutes of yours. Tibet was our neighbor. It wasn't China our neighbor. That's very important, and that is something we have to understand. If Tibet was our neighbor and China wasn't our neighbor, when did China become our neighbor? Only when the People Liberation Army under Mao Zedong finally declared themselves in China as the People's Republic, PRC, People's Republic of China, and not the nationalist. So therefore, we find that there is a certain amount of change of guard which has taken place in 1949, and once they've become the PRC, and in 1950, you find Xinjiang and Tibet Autonomous Region, or Tibet so-called, the Chinese have annexed it to their territory. Now, when we talk of annexation of these two huge regions, and they are not so small, Tibet itself is about 1.2 million square kilometers. Xinjiang is 1.6 million square kilometers. Tibet has a population of not more than 4 million, with a density of not more than 3 people per square kilometer. Xinjiang has a population of about 16 odd million people with a density of about 25. So you find such huge provinces of Xinjiang and Tibet, which is providing virtually a buffer to the Han population, which is towards the east coast. Now, the east coast Han population, that is why you have a problem in the South China Sea. The South China Sea is 3.5 million square kilometers, of which fisheries, oil, what have you. And obviously, like the Chinese say, we would not let anybody sleep next to our bedroom. So the bedroom over there is what is considered, if they are there in the mainland along the coast, the entire South China Sea is something which is in their neighborhood. Then you have not only this, you have Yunnan, you have Manchuria, all of these provinces, which are again about 1.1 billion square kilometers. So you find that the Han population has surrounded itself with Xinjiang, Tibet, Yunnan, and Mongolia. And therefore, and on one side is the South China Sea. So you have the Han population, which is 94% of the population being guarded by such huge, where now the Hans have gone and occupied Xinjiang. Almost 50% of the population is Han. Over 60% of the population in Tibet is Han. And so this kind of a thing, which has resulted in, you find that what is now happening in Arunachal Pradesh, erstwhile Nepal, you realize that there was what is popularly called the McMahon line. Now that McMahon line, which was there and supposedly initialed by the Chinese along with the Tibetan this thing in 1914, but you have to really connect yourself, because the Chinese from 1688 till 1912 were under a Qing dynasty, and this Qing dynasty till 1912 is controlled by Manchurians. They are not Hans who are controlling. So you can imagine for what a duration the Manchurians are occupying the whole of China from 1688 till 1912. So that is what we must understand. Then people will realize as to why such a thing is happening. Yeah.
But tell me, if China is actually looking for Indian territory, then why is it not engaging in armed conflict? Why fisticuffs? Why lathis? Why just with basic weapons, not the rifles, not the arms. They are not doing it. Even after the Galwan class, why did they de-escalate the process? What is the game plan?
Excellent. I think that's something which actually what you've asked is hitting the nail on the head. What makes China do what they're doing? Chinese believe in the Sun Tzu art of war, that is to subdue the enemy without a fight. If you can subdue your enemy without a fight, it's so much better because the Chinese have all in the entire history, if they've ever won a war, it is 1962. Chinese have always lost everywhere, wherever they've gone. But in 62, they have won a war. If that be so, would they like to have a now? What was 1962 India to what is India today? The Chinese know they cannot ever think or attempt even to go in for a war in which they can have victory, irrespective of whatever the weapons they may be holding, whatever the comprehensive national power differential that they may be between India and China, whatever differential they may be in the GDP. China has a $19 trillion GDP. We have looking at $5 trillion by 2030. So we are nowhere near it. Acceptable, everything. But what matters is the man behind the machine. And that man, the Indian armed forces man, who is so much acclimatized, so much, tested at such great heights that the Chinese will find it extremely difficult to fight an Indian army at these great heights. Firstly, because maybe because of the the drubbing we got in 1962, we've been up and about. And this is where China finds that it is not worth it to go to war. If you can get what you can. Now, what is China looking at? Two things. They were wanting to have that Aksai Chain Road, which passes through to Xinjiang. If that they've already got it. They had a 1959 claim line. They've already almost got it. Then you find that they were not interested in the Johnson, this thing. Okay, they thought McCartney McDonald, they've already crossed that. Now, here you find in McMahon line, forget the McMahon line. According to them, the whole of Arunachal Pradesh as part of South Tibet is there. That is 90,000 square kilometers. Whatever they already have is 40,000 square kilometers. So this is the kind of expansionist policies which I would say Xi Jinping is looking at what is called the third revolution. The first revolution was, of course, to make China communist. So the Qing dynasty was overthrown. You find subsequently Kuomintang and Chiang Kai-shek are in Taiwan. And therefore, you have the whole mainland China under the communists that they've gained control of. Second is the Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms that have come in a very huge way and that has given China a standing which you can reasonably compare to what China was in the 19th century. In 19th century, China had 25% of the world GDP. Today, it has 17% of the world GDP. So that is the second revolution. The third revolution is now led by Xi Jinping, who firmly believes in what Mao Zedong said, power flows from the barrel of the gun. Deng Xiaoping said, hide your capabilities, first rise. Now Xi Jinping feels we have risen and now we must get what they perceive as theirs, whether it is Arunachal Pradesh, whether it is Ladakh, whether it is Bhutan, whether it is Sikkim, whether it is Nepal, anything and everything which they feel is theirs. And that is why we find that China has settled their boundary disputes with, out of 14 countries that they share boundary with 12. Only with 2 countries they have not settled the boundary dispute, India and Bhutan. These are the only 2 countries that they have not settled the boundary dispute with. Yeah.
You mentioned about 1962 war. That's a war that China has won. Actually, today I've just reading Sekhar Gupta's piece in the Business Standard, in which he writes that 1962 war, China did not want to invade India. And Nehru too did not want to enter into a war with China. China was playing around with the similar intimidating tactics, but it is the opposition leaders in parliament who, building up a euphoria of nationalism, forced the hand of Nehru to get into war. Nehru knew getting into a war means defeat, sure defeat at the hands of China. But still, the nationalism halo forced him, egged him on to get into a war and face a humiliating defeat. So he says a similar kind of a situation is being created today. And whether the Indian government, and he says that China just doesn't want a slice of your territory, Indian territory at all. It just wants to have that psychological war, but wants India to fall into the same trap as 1962. What do you think about this assessment?
Well, he has his opinion, but let's go back to what is being is the fact. First and foremost, we won our independence in 1947. China, the existing China, the communist China, has come into existence in 1949. And therefore, we have 2 years from 47 to 49. We have inherited what we call as the British entire empire, the treaties, and we honor from the British once we took over in 1947, everything. Of that comprises what is known as the McMahon line. We talk about the East first. As when you talk about the Eastern Ladakh is concerned, well, at that point of time, it was accepted boundaries undefined. That means we were interested in having the Johnson line as the line between the Tibetans and India for a very simple reason, because in 1846, when the state of Jammu and Kashmir was formed, there's a Treaty of Amritsar. And that Treaty of Amritsar, which allowed China, allowed British to give the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir to Gulab Singh to rule. Before that, in 1842, is the Treaty of Chushul. And just before that, 1841 is where Zorawar Singh dies. And before that, Zorawar takes the entire Baltistan in 1839. He takes Baltistan. Before that, he takes the entire Ladakh. And so forth, you find that slowly and steadily, Gulab Singh, by the Treaty of Amritsar, which got to him as Jammu and Kashmir, he has expanded. And that expansion went up to Baltistan. And in 1841, Zorawar was killed by the Tibetans. And when he was killed by the Tibetans went for a Treaty of Chushul. That is a peace and tranquility treaty with the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, whose empire extended to Shahjadullah Fort. And therefore, all this that is happening, and as I told you, by 1912, the Chinese communists had just about started. The nationalist Chinese had lost. They were losing and they were hitting. The Japanese were in full control. The British were in full control. And the Treaty of Beijing of 1860, the Chinese have been saying that century of humiliation. What is that century of humiliation? That they feel that they have signed the treaties with Japan and Britishers from a position of weakness. So they do not accept all that. As a result of which, you find that virtually the Tibetans use their own passport, travel the world over. Everybody accepted Tibet. Chinese could not do a thing in Tibet. And it is only in 1949, when China finally became a communist China, mainland China, they decided to invade, annex Tibet and annex Xinjiang province. So to say that no, the Chinese communists are not the Chinese nationalists that we are referring to. The Qing dynasty, the Yuan dynasty, the Ming dynasty are totally different. At any point of time, the word that they use are suzerain and sovereign. Much that the Chinese may be sovereign, the Tibetans may be suzerain at some point of time, because they were exchanging nothing much but a seal, which the Beijing emperor would give it to the Tibetan Lama, and it went on along like that way. But to say that who was in charge of external affairs till he died, none other than Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. From the day India was born, the 15th of August 1947, till he died, who was in charge? He was the foreign minister. Who was the defense minister for a long time in between? Krishna Menon, during this entire crisis of 1962. When was NIFA handed over to the army? 1959. When did India get independence? 1947. When was the Treaty of McMahon line drawn? 1914. So you see, there's a long list. To say that nobody, if that was so, when 1959, when NEPA was handed over to the army, General Timaya, who was then the chief of the army staff, he virtually resigned, because Krishna Menon told him in no uncertain terms, General, you look after Pakistan. China, we will handle it. We understand better China how to handle it. So they thought they would be able to handle. It's only in 1959 when the Lonju incident took place, then in the parliament, without even consulting anybody, Pandit Nehru announced in the parliament that now we hand over the entire Nepal to the armed forces. Imagine from 1947 till 1959, of October or November, I don't remember the correct month, the entire border was looked after by Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Home Affairs, to Assam Rifles, to everything of their own people or IB. Subir Datta was then the foreign secretary for a long, long time. Who was the foreign secretary at that point? M.J. Desai, who was the foreign secretary in 62 time. So we have a history to say that, well, obviously Pandit Nehru didn't want to go to war. Who wanted to go to war with China? Or even for the, that is why, when did the talks collapse between Pandit Nehru and Jawaharlal? 1960. After that, there was no interaction. And then when he went back, and especially after the Bandung conference in Indonesia, where Jawaharlal went and told Mao Zedong that Pandit Nehru seems to have now thinking that he's a world leader and that he represents the third world. I think it's time that we did something. He is not agreeable to anything. Otherwise, they were willing for a swap. And the swap was, we accept what is there at McMahon Line, because the same McMahon Line was accepted with Myanmar. And that in the eastern, that they be given concession so that they could construct that road, which had already been constructed. By 1956, the Chinese invited Ambassador Panikkar, who was then in China, to come for the inauguration of the road Aksai chain that we are talking about. So we are all caught off guard by what the Chinese were doing, because we didn't have our troops that forward. But then to say the Chinese were not expansionists, of course the Chinese were expansionists. Even before, by 62, much of the territory had already been lost before the war. After the war of 1962, wherever China was and came in as per the 1959 claim line and even beyond, they pulled back. They pulled back almost 20 kilometers behind their own claim line and wanted us also to pull back 20 kilometers. That we did not accept, and that wherever we are today, we're virtually along the LAC. So to say that the Chinese didn't want it or that Pandit Nehru didn't want it, obviously Pandit Nehru didn't want to fight a war. They're absolutely right. Who wants to fight a war? But then they were not agreeable because of a very different, each one of them. Pandit Nehru thought that he inherited everything from the British and that we must follow the British. But the Britishers, that entire McMahon Treaty was not signed. It was only initial. The Chinese said, once we go back, they never went back, never got back to us. Because why? Because the First World War started. After the First World War started, the Second World War started. This entire McMahon line was lying in a cupboard and it will be dusted. It is during Lord Curzon's time that it was reopened. And then Curzon sent it a treaty in 1899 to the Chinese. Chinese did not get back. So they accepted that probably a part of Aksai chain would remain with India and a part of Aksai chain would remain with China. So that was very exciting because Curzon thought that 1899 he had sent a formal treaty to them and they have not said anything. It's almost 1912 or something. So he said, now let it be, we'll accept it. Chinese didn't. And when China came, the communist China came in power in 1949, equations changed because our neighbor, and then you refer back to what Sardar Patel said. Sardar Patel wrote a letter in 1950, November, to Pandit Nehru to say very clearly that the Chinese are expansionists, they absolutely, they are not going to stick to it, that the Tibetans are reposing faith in us. You better be careful because China is going to do something which we are not prepared for. So do not. And what did Pandit Nehru want? An army of 1.5 lakhs. That was exactly, he said, I just want an army of 1.5 lakh. That is also the more I am capable of handling India with police. He didn't even want army. He said, I'll handle police. That's what I'm saying. Till 1959, Nepal was almost handled by police. There was no army there whatsoever. So this is all kind of, we can carry on till cows come home, discuss all this, but this is what I'm stating you are facts. So therefore, to say that Chinese don't want it, or obviously Chinese want because as per their perception, South Tibet, entire Arunachal is there. 90,000 square kilometers. Eastern Ladakh, they're looking at 45,000 square kilometers. What is all this? Without a, as I told you, they believe in Sun Tzu, that if you can subdue the enemy without a fight, so far, so good, and carry on. But then that is not what it is. Well, respect his viewpoint, but that's what I considered point of view.
But if you say that China is an expansionist power, but does not want to fight a full-fledged war, So it takes to subterfuges and wants to win a war without actually fighting it. So if that is the case, do you think it has succeeded so far? What happened after the Galwan class? Did the Chinese actually benefit from the Galwan war in any way?
See, as we keep talking about, in comprehensive national power, China is miles ahead. We accept it. In GDP, we accept the $19 trillion economy. We have a little less than 5 trillion, maybe about $3.5 trillion expecting to be this. World, yes, we have a good political leadership. We have a good world standing. Everybody's looking up to India as a country with democracy, rule of law, and things are normal, and everybody, freedom of speech, freedom. So there's tremendous amount of democracy that exists, and there is tremendous amount of unity and diversity. All that is fine, which people seem to accept. But China is a communist nation. Everything is controlled by one man, and that is Xi Jinping. If you think anything has happened at Yangtze without his nod, they are sadly mistaken. There are no rogue elements there. I can tell you with certainty there are no rogue elements there right now. It's everything controlled by Xi Jinping because I have experienced all this. I have been there. I've seen them coming. I've seen what I would be talking to them. I had made outside the that wall of rocks that we had made. I had made a seating arrangement for them because I was right till there. I told them, "You're welcome, but please be seated there." Since you've moved up walking for last 45 minutes, I'll give you a glass of water, I'll give you a cup of tea, I can offer you biscuits, no problem, but please be seated there. And they would be seated there. They'll come on a patrolling, which would be about 10, 15 people, and go back. That's it. But now why this kind of a thing? And primarily, especially when what has happened at Galwan, after what they did in Galwan, this kind of a provocation which is coming from China is purely indicative of pressurizing India. Many reasons. There could be many reasons. Exercising with the United States. Why you exercise? We've been exercising with China. I have exercised with China hand in hand. But if they are not wanting to exercise with India for whatever the reason it is, India does not want to exercise because of the bad relations. So we've been holding joint exercises with America. We've been holding it with China. We've been holding it with France. We've been holding it with England. So Australia, so many countries we hold, including Bangladesh, including Nepal. So there's nothing new about exercises being held. But just because China now thinks they're center of the universe, they feel they have arrived. They feel India is a democracy. There is so much of, I would say, distorted views in India that anybody can exploit. There are sizable population in India which might still be thinking almost the Chinese way. In 1962, we had the communists thinking the Chinese way. Absolutely. There is no denying the fact of what happened in Kolkata and what would happen subsequently. So the communists are actually talking the Chinese language, even in 1962 when the war is going on. So you have this kind of, because of democracy, Pakistan has one army controlling Pakistan, irrespective of whoever, like sham democracy, pseudo democracy, whichever democracy elected, selected, it's the army which is controlling, which is a neighbor and enemy. China, the Communist Party of China, which controls the PLA, is part of the Communist Party of China. So what do? And we are a democracy, and which is where everybody wants. Now you find a lot of people saying, why were we not informed? I can bet, even if we are about to inform, why weren't in 99 when it happened with me, nobody was informed? Why did the people of today, what they're shouting today, then people are not this thing? Maybe mobile connectivity, a better connectivity, people come to know what is going on. But what can you do? You have to grant to that man on the ground, that young army officers who are there on the ground. Can you imagine that is controlling a situation like this? Because of treaties that we have, 1993, 1996, subsequently going up to 2007, 8, 13, that shots will be fired. But what is happening? That those treaties, first and foremost, the Chinese have thrown it into the dustbin after what they did in Galwan. Secondly, they're coming right up to the LAC perception of theirs. So we are sitting there. That means not a shot is fired, they're coming. Till when I was there, the strength was 10 or 15. Then the strength increases. Now I'm told 300 to 600. Imagine, they would be thinking, let's overwhelm the post of the Indians, that they may have 50 or 60, and then we'll see then we will negotiate. Tambu to gado. Possession is 9th, 10th, possession is occupation. So, let's occupy. Chinese have a very, very different mindset. And we can only deal with China from a position of strength. And that strength, the armed forces will display. But a solution to a problem of like this kind is political. If you're expecting a military solution, well, I think it's very, very difficult to have a military solution to such a problem. It has to be a political solution. Because who want to fight? Would like to fight, get into a boxing bout, fisticuffs with baseball bats, spiked with constitutional. What is all this? This is absolutely nonsensical and shameful. Absolutely shameful. As soldiers, China should not indulge in this kind of a thing. But that is what they're doing. Not a shot is fired. Wow, what a fantastic feeling. Lovely treaties being honored. Not a shot is fired. But you come right up to my door and start doing all this nonsense. I think the Chinese have to do some introspection if they want peace and tranquility.
But today the argument is that the war will not be fought by the ground forces. It will be all by airborne forces. That's the reality. Then is it somewhat misleading that 3 division of or 2 division of Chinese PLA at our doorstep, and that's what they're threatening all about? Is this also, how do you react to Rahul Gandhi's statement that China is preparing for a full-scale war?
See, in mountains, whoever is occupying heights, he is the first winner. So if you are dominating heights are occupied by you, and if you are going to say that, well, the wars in future are going to be fought in cyber, space, artificial intelligence, air, drones, well, it may be, but the you have to have boots on the ground. Until and unless you have boots on the ground, how do you say that this is mine? If Yangtze is mine, is how do I say that Yangtze is mine? Yangtze is mine because my troops are there. They have pushed the Chinese out of there. That is my troops are there. So it is not going to be any different. It's 2022. I'm fighting a war of 16th century. Very with clubs, dandas, and whatever you have, fisticuffs, sapper gloves, maro, buka, maro, hath, toro. What is all this? It is not an akhada. This is not what nations who have regular armies of standing doing like this kind of a thing. One small wrong, anything wrong can happen. And that wrong will take both the nations into trouble because once the shots are fired and you have bullet injuries, nobody on earth can stop it. Let me tell you, nobody on earth. And if you are saying that the troops are coming without weapon or troops are without weapon, no, all troops are with weapons. It is just that they're not firing. So it is a very, very serious situation. And to say that, well, the future was nothing. The future wars can be fought in anything, but in mountains, what matters are boots on ground. What matters is the dominating heights. Why do you think he wants Yangtze? Because it's a dominating height.
Who will fire the first bullet, do you think? Indian force or Chinese?
See, well, it's very difficult. I don't think we will because we are generally, we are reacting. We understand. We understand that until unless we are fired upon, we are not going to fire. But yes, if my own life is in danger, I will not hesitate to fire. Why would I hesitate to fire if my own life is in danger? I will not. And this is what the Chinese must understand. And this is what I think the word has gone. And hopefully, after what has now happened at Yangtze, where they have been pushed back, it's very important at this point of time. The entire country must stand behind to say, no, we all respect the army, but, we all respect the army, but this and that and this. I think we must, on issues of national security, let not there be any political points being earned or something like that. It is very essential that we must ensure that such things don't happen. If anybody has
do you
any
think
knowledge
today's
of what
military exercise involving Rafale and Chinooks and Sukhois is a kind of a exercise to give China a befitting relation?
No. See, these are very normal things. After all, in mountains at that great heights, you require logistical support. You require even the pilots who are flying, should the balloon go up for whatever the reason, you have to know the terrain. You can't be sitting behind and only seeing the maps unless you know the terrain. And you have to correlate maps with what you have to see what is happening on ground or how the ground looks like. So this is all part of training. See, we must not use this aspect of this thing to be seen as war scenarios building. Definitely not. I can assure you, neither India wants war nor China wants war. best is we sit down, and the Chinese must learn to behave. They must learn to honor the treaties that they have signed, and not under the garb of not understanding the language or any other issues that things go wrong. No, the Chinese, if they've signed on the dotted line, must learn to respect that. Otherwise, we will more of these incidents will keep happening, and you don't know when the thing can go wrong, because it's very, very difficult to control troops at that point of time. Let me give you a small example. Its height is 17 or 1,000 feet. These are great heights. People are running from one end to the other end. You get exhausted. Somebody just dies of a heart attack. Nothing to do with fist fight. Nothing to do with firing. He just dies of a heart attack. You can imagine. Rumors spread. Mar gaya. You don't know what will happen after that. Later on, inquiries and wo to heart attack se mara yaar. Heart attack se mara. But then at that point of time, the tempers were so high, you're pushing, killing, poor thing dies. So it is very essential that both the Indian Army and the PLA must not confront each other. They must stay at a distance, and that is the only solution if you want peace and tranquility along the LAC.
Thank you, General Kulkarni. We're running out of time. It's been a very, very interesting discussion in which you threw light about history, about politics, and the defense preparedness of both the countries. And I'm sure this has been enlightening for our viewers, and we would like to engage with you in the days to come. Thank you again, General Kulkarni, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Monty.